everyone. I am Katey Rich. This is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. This week, by total coincidence, we have kind of a war theme going on. Later in the episode, you'll hear my conversation with Kirsten Dunst. She's the star of this spring's kind of surprise breakout hit Civil War. And she has this long career in Hollywood, of course, and which means she has a ton of insight on absolutely everything from how to master a close-up, which she does really well in Civil War, to when to bring your kids with you while filming on location, something I obviously am very interested in. But first, my co-host this week is Michael Schulman. His book, Oscar Wars, came out last year and is basically in my head all of the time, every time we approach a new award season. I'm sure it's the same for you, Michael. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, that's so nice. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
I mean, once you have the phrase Oscar Wars in your mind, I feel like everything becomes a war, at least in my head. And we'll talk about whether or not that's true for yours.
Absolutely. I'm ready for the battle.
So, Michael, you're also a staff writer for The New Yorker. So then this time of year, you and I are doing the same thing, which is basically just trying to see a ton of movies and figure out what we're going to be covering. So kind of before we jump into the season as a whole, like, what have you seen lately? What are you feeling passionate about? What movies are you really loving to talk about right now?
I've seen a ton of stuff over the past month because I don't go to the festivals outside of New York. So I've just been catching up in New York Film Festival and other things. In fact, just earlier today, I was at a screening of Conclave and basically came out of that movie an hour ago. So I have a lot of like cardinals dancing in my brain.
And a lot of pieces of paper on a red thread that we're going to use to write this podcast script.
I mean, weirdly, watching it, I kept thinking of it as a metaphor for award season in general. I mean, it's about people jockeying to win this anointed title. And there are sort of convoluted ballot protocols and, traditionalists versus more forward-thinking
you have to consolidate
candidates.
your power. You got to figure out whose vote you're going to have in your corner. It's all there.
Exactly. And you have to campaign without it seeming like you're trying to campaign. Because, the lust for power is, a sin. So it's sort of the same in Oscar season where you have to campaign without seeming like you really want the Oscar.
Yep.
Very similar. I don't know. It's all I thought about.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Conclave is a crowd pleaser in on its own. Like it won an audience award at Middleburg. I watched it play at Montclair a couple weeks ago. But I wonder if that theme with Oscar season, do you think that's going to earn it some more votes? Like Oscar voters are going to get it on a level that everyone else doesn't?
Well, I think a lot about movies as metaphors for themselves. And that came up a lot in the book. For instance, why did Shakespeare in Love win? I mean, there are a million answers, and most people would put at the top of the list Harvey Weinstein, browbeating people. But one of the other reasons is that it was a metaphor for Hollywood, for the industry. And, it's about creative people, and it's about, their jokes about, people getting their name above the title. And I do think it resonated for that reason. So things resonate for weird reasons. And even Gladiator it's a movie about big budget spectacle in a way in the Colosseum, but of course it played that role in life in the movies. So I don't know if it'll get Conclave votes, but I do think it might weirdly resonate with people watching it the season. Yeah,
it's like a movie being a metaphor for itself and having that insidery appeal, but also people want to feel like a movie's about something bigger, like there's like a bigger theme that it's tapping into. Like that's how Everything Everywhere All at Once becomes like not a genre hopping movie, it's a movie about family. So it's like what will the narrative around Conclave be to make it not just like fun power dynamics, but like the bigger picture somehow?
Yeah. I mean, since you brought up Everything Everywhere All at Once, another thing I've been noticing lately is that movies that are about underdogs have been doing really well in the last couple of years. Like, I would say Moonlight, Parasite,
Nomadland.
Coda, Nomadland. Yeah. And I think in a way what often happens is that becomes the narrative of the movie. The movie itself is an underdog in the way that Coda and Everything Everywhere certainly were, as sort of weird little movies that became the little train that could. And it's interesting thinking about that in this year because I think some of the movies are certainly about underdogs, like fighting for survival. I mean, Anora is a great example of that. And I think the movie itself is this sort of tough movie that keeps sort of fighting ahead in the way that the character
literally
does.
like scrapping and fighting through the movie.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would say even The Brutalist is about, someone in a submissive position fighting through for his vision.
Yeah.
In a way that I think Brady Corbett is sort of talking about himself in a way there. I don't know. I think there are a number of different underdogs this year.
Yeah. Would you apply that theory to even Oppenheimer, even though it's like the most gigantic movie, but it's about someone like fighting to get his vision seen? Like, do you feel like that theory holds for that one, or is that an anomaly?
I don't know if you could call that movie an underdog.
Well,
yes,
Oppenheimer himself was an underdog sometimes. I don't know.
last
Maybe
year was an overdog kind of year.
Yeah. Well, it does feel like this is a real underdog kind of year. Like I talked about this in the panel I did in Montclair, just about how like indies, there's a couple of studios out there. Paramount showed Gladiator 2 a couple days after we had that panel. But I mean, do you feel like there's an indie dominance story that's running through this season so far?
For sure. Yeah. In a way, it's reminded me a little bit of, was it 1997 when it was like the year of the indies?
Yeah. Well, that was the Titanic year. So there was, maybe you're thinking like the Fargo year, like 96.
Yeah. Fargo and The English Patient.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a weirdly unsettled year, as I'm sure you've talked about constantly. Yeah. One of the reasons is that I feel like the studios aren't really a huge player this year, and partly that's their own damn fault because of the strike and the movies that didn't get made or didn't get completed. And the things that they do have are like sequels or part ones, part twos. It feels like last year was all about the sort of revenge of the studios in a way, or the return of the Empire Strikes Back.
Totally.
And this year it's almost the opposite.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen Gladiator 2, like they had the big screening in New York on Monday, but like, the buzz around that has been strong. Wicked's kind of coming around the bend. I keep hearing vaguely from people who have seen it. And I think we've been kind of sitting there watching those two, really. Maybe there's another one I'm not thinking of, as like, all right, if a studio is going to get it, it's going to be these two. But as many strengths as I think those movies could have, I think the part two, the part one thing you're talking about, it might be like more powerful than maybe we're giving them credit for right now.
Yeah, no, I wasn't at that screening of Gladiator 2.
It was great. You missed so much. But yeah, like even that Hans Zimmer's score for Dune 2 got disqualified from consideration yesterday as we were recording this. So I was like, oh yeah, like they're kind of like repeating the playbook in a lot of ways. And I still think Dune 2 is a pretty strong contender for all those crafts that it won the first time around. But it is an interesting reminder that like originality does have like more power in the Oscar race than at the box office, For
sure. Yeah. And it's interesting looking back, like there are some years that are the kind of more traditionalist years where like Hollywood wants to assert its kind of traditional values in a way. In the conclave metaphor, it's like, the guy wanting to take the church back to before Vatican II,
Yep.
In a way, when the original Gladiator won, it was a little bit like that. It was at the tail end of sort of the Miramax decade. And it was a way for Hollywood to burnish its, it had a nostalgic factor. It had this, sword and sandals, like this is an old genre that we are reviving and reinventing and putting on a big, huge show that is going to dominate. And so it would be interesting to see if Gladiator 2 pulls the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I've said on this show a lot, and also just talking to people, is it feels like the story Hollywood wants to tell about itself is going to be determined by the election one way or another. And we don't really know what that's going to be yet. And you wrote about the Moonlight La La Land year and like how we all kind of remember that being the crazy envelope mix-up, but that's coming 3 months after Trump's election. So everyone's already kind of insane. Like, do you also feel like you're kind of waiting for the election to tell us where this is all going to go?
Absolutely. And, the Moonlight La La Land year was a very clear example of a world event changing the mood in Hollywood dramatically. And, I remember how long, I'm sure you do, La La Land was the front runner. And, I spoke to someone who worked on the marketing for that movie who said, after Trump won, we couldn't lean into our message, which was, here's to the fools who dream. Like no one was really feeling that. And they didn't have anywhere to go to push their narrative of like dreamy Hollywood romance. And meanwhile, Moonlight, I'm not saying this is at all the reason it won. It won because people loved it so much and it was great. But, even when I talked to Barry Jenkins, he said, this first screening he went to of the movie after the election in 2016, there was this palpable feeling of people wanting to sort of protect the main character from the sort of hard Scrabble world that we had sort of, that the country had just entered, that the sort of the vulnerability of that character resonated in a different way. So I do think that the vibes, to use an overused word, are going to be one thing or another thing. And I mean, another caveat, this is like the last thing people should be thinking of in regards to the election.
Go vote, pay attention to your ballot, wait, let the Oscars happen later. But
but it's interesting, like The Brutalist is an immigrant story. Honora is about a strong woman. Like, how will it feel if we have our first female president? Will that be like a fuck you, I'm Honora, hear me roar feeling?
They can have that tagline for free. Are you going to take a fee if Neon uses that?
I think hear me roar. I think that goes to Helen Reddy. But yeah, and then like I loved The Apprentice, but I feel like if Trump loses, no one's ever going to want to think about it again.
I know. I kind of wondered that if he wins also, like one way or another. That I think that movie is really strong. Like Jeremy Strong, I still think we could consider in the mix because of like the strength of, he's won an Emmy and everything.
For sure.
But no, that's a movie where like you see it, you're like, I just kind of want to think about something else. And there's a lot of other things that you can think about instead.
Yeah.
I had written this when we were talking about this beforehand, that like if I'm trying to pick like a war that has like dominated the Oscars over the last 7 or 8 years, it's the streamers versus everybody else. And last year was like the return of the studios, as you were saying. Netflix still out there without a Best Picture win, despite many, many years of effort. Like Netflix is really in the mix. Apple's got Blitz, which is like a pretty strong contender. I think maybe the strongest one they've had since Coda. But it does feel like some of the steam of the streaming wars has faded, maybe because like, they're just throwing less money around. Do you still see that as kind of the dividing line we're working with, or is there something new now?
Yeah, I mean, when I looked back at history for Oscar wars and tried to figure out what stories to tell, it was always about like what's the bigger war that is playing out through the Oscars. Whether it's the blacklist in the 50s or the sort of generation gap in the late 60s, early 70s. Or if it's sort of the Miramax versus Hollywood, indie versus Hollywood, or sort of the racial Sturm and Drang of the Oscars so white period. And I do think that streaming has been such a big source of anxiety for Hollywood, like the idea that the business model is changing so profoundly, and that people don't even really know what a movie is or how people watch it anymore, and no one's been able to figure that out quite. Yeah. So I do think streaming is still a sort of pervasive source of uncertainty, and that sort of tends to create battle lines. And of course, Netflix as a player, there's something that's just unresolved about it. You know what I mean? Like they have never won Best Picture, and it's kind of hard to track what Netflix is even going for day to day. But I don't know. And this year, it's almost like a three-way war with the studios, the indies, and the streamers. Like, Netflix and A24, and then like Warner Brothers. Like it I don't know. It doesn't feel as clear cut to me as like streamers versus everyone else.
Yeah.
And something like A24 has sort of been able to succeed at both, theatrical and streaming. Like, they stream their movies on Max. So it feels very unresolved. Like the tectonic plates under Hollywood are kind of about that, I think. So I would say that's still an ongoing war.
It's one of those things, that'll become like a clear battle lines in 10 years, but like we don't have the distance from it to kind of figure out where things stand right now, right?
Well, absolutely. And like, my unsatisfying answer to this question is like, I don't think you can ever figure out what the war was about any given Oscar year until at least like the night of the Oscars. In some cases, like you need a decade to figure out what was going on.
I mean, it's like, I feel like my job maybe more than yours is to be like, well, here's what this year's race is all about. And so many weeks you're just being like, well, this is what I think, but next week I might think something different. And that's what makes it fun, because it's so hard to figure out, but also, everyone's kind of making it up as they're trying to figure out what's going on.
Totally. But I liked how unsettled it is.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned A24, which like not only is like very much in the mix, but just has a lot going on. Like there was a point where, they had picked out Queer and The Brutalist in the fall festivals. They already had Sing Sing out in theaters. And you're like, how many Best Actor contenders can one studio field, really? Do you see them kind of flexing their strength in some way with all of these pickups? There's also like Neon that like if A24 doesn't get something, a lot of times Neon's going to get it. They're competing for the same audience. Is this just like a clash of the titans that's happening very politely and supporting great cinema in the process?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think you can have a bigger flex than A24 had the year of Everything Everywhere All at Once, and also the Whale, the Best Actor win for The Whale. Like it just was a A24 sweep. So I don't know how they top themselves, but they certainly have a lot of dogs in the fight, and it is interesting to me that Neon, which is kind of like a sort of like their smaller competitor, is in there with this very strong contender with Anora.
Yeah.
And I am curious how that plays out. I don't know. I mean, I hate to compare anyone to Miramax in the 90s because it's such an unflattering
Sure, it's a loaded
comparison.
term, yeah.
Yeah, it's loaded, but, minus the Harvey factor,
sure.
I do feel like A24 is sort of where Miramax was, like, toward the late 90s, where they've sort of crested, and now it's about, like, keeping it going and sort of riding the wave.
Yeah, or maybe even where Searchlight was in the 2010s, where like they were just winning Best Picture after Best Picture for a slightly less loaded comparison for A24 to be compared to.
And it also seems like it's before the moment. No one has yet really started to openly resent them, is the thing.
Yeah.
Like, don't you feel like there's not an A24 backlash in the air?
I know. And they're like so cool still, which is such a hard thing to hold on to. And you see like Neon coming up, but it's like Mubi. It feels like it's kind of coming in on some of that same like the beloved by cinephiles thing. But A24 just like has their spot that they've held on to since Moonlight. And that's a long time to hold that spot in one place.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be an interesting test. Have you seen Baby Girl?
Not yet.
Yeah, so it's the Nicole Kidman movie. It's coming out at Christmas, but it's filmed in the A24 office. Like that stands in for Nicole Kidman's like high-powered corporate office. So like, maybe that becomes the snake eating its tail moment. That like
talk about a metaphor for itself.
I mean, it's a beautiful office space. It made sense for them to take advantage of it. So knowing that you like often will write profiles of people throughout the course of award season, your Bowen Yang one was, he's in Wicked, but, more of a TV star. Like, who are you interested in? Like, who has a narrative as an individual that feels like it's got a lot of room to like grow and capture people's attention this year?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, another way of asking that is like, who are the main characters of Oscar season going to be? And as I sort of plotted through Oscar Wars, I kind of looked at years and thought, like, who are the main characters of each chapter? Like, who's starring in the movie of this, of like, the 1941 Oscar season? A couple people come to mind this year. Mikey Madison, obviously.
Yeah.
In a way, because, like, again, metaphor for itself, like, it's a movie about a very strong woman announcing herself and being sort of you cannot dismiss this woman.
Yep.
And I feel like Mikey Madison has that in her performance. And similarly with Brady Corbett, like I feel like The Brulist is a movie that announces an auteur who's trying to create something very ambitious, which is what the movie is also about.
Absolutely.
So I think that he's going to just... And again, like, I'm not saying these people will win. Like, I feel like last year, the main characters of Oscar season were Bradley Cooper and, like, Lily Gladstone to a large extent.
That's a great point.
You know what I mean? Like, they were the people who were on my mind a lot, but that didn't mean they were the winners.
Yeah.
I also am very curious who's going to bring this sort of old school star power, because there doesn't seem to be a lot this year. Like, and maybe it's Nicole Kidman for Baby Girl. Maybe it's like Angelina Jolie. I'm also very interested in, like, I haven't seen Gladiator 2 yet, but I'm sort of interested if like Denzel Washington's going to be a big force, especially because two of his kids are also doing a different movie together. Which
he produced also. So it's a full like family. Yeah. That's the theory I'm working with right now. In the newsletter that's been out previously when this episode's out, I wrote about that Gladiator 2 screening and how Denzel Washington's sitting in this Q&A, even in the enormous IMAX theater, like he just kind of fills up a room with his presence. And he has 2 Oscars, but like a lot of, Meryl Streep's got 3. Why shouldn't Denzel Washington have 3? So like in terms of like giant star, I don't think it gets much bigger than him, at least in this year's race. And that, I think it's gonna be interesting to watch.
Yeah, and the idea that he's sort of arriving as like a dynasty, like a Hollywood dynasty. I mean, we'll see. I haven't seen Piano Lesson, but it's just interesting that one of his sons is directing another in this movie that he's producing, and then he also maybe has like a sort of best supporting actor role in Gladiator 2. So I don't know. And then, in terms of their characters, I'm always interested in people who arrive in Oscar season and sort of expand the frame of like who is in the picture, like whether it's through identity or like people who are unconventional. Like, I'm thinking about Carla Sofia Gascon, who could be the first openly trans actress nominated for Emilia Perez. Clarence Macklin from Sing Sing, who sort of like is a real sort of formerly incarcerated person who's basically playing himself.
Yeah.
Like when people arrive on the scene, and even sometimes it's someone who's like the subject of the movie, like when Tonya Harding was around, or I always think about when the real
Sure.
Philomena was everywhere.
Oh,
and like,
boy, was she ever. She was everywhere.
And everyone kept calling her the real Philomena. I sort of thought of that as like her name. Oh, it's the real Philomena.
She went to
her
Congress.
friends call her that.
Yeah, that was a Harvey Weinstein special where Real Philomena was just absolutely unmissable.
One of the things that Weinstein always did was he always found like a mascot for a movie who was sort of attention grabbing, and one of them was they weren't always human. One of them was the dog from
Augie.
The Artist, and I thought of that this past year when the dog from Anatomy of a Fall became like the mascot of the movie. I was like, oh, that's like a Harvey move.
Yeah, it was very smart of them.
One of his more innocent like tricks.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, like, it's like the pack of like all the men in Anora, like if they all travel as a group, do they like, it's like either you have a mascot or you travel as a pack and you get everyone's attention like the Parasite cast did. And, somewhere in between there, you find a way to command a room.
The Oppen Bros, what were they called again?
Oppen Homies.
Oppen Homies, yeah.
How quickly we
Maybe
forget.
all the Cardinals from Conclave will be like hanging out together.
God. I mean,
like John Lithgow and,
So to go from like just people themselves to like the overall narratives of a film, like we've got a lot of movies that are out there now. Nora's been getting a ton of attention. It just opened in theaters. It made a ton of money. Emilia Perez is, I think, opening very soon. That cast has been everywhere. Do you sense staying power in any of these? Or do you feel like something might come later on to kind of sweep all of them out? Is anything going to stick around until February and we're going to talk about it in the same way?
I don't know. I mean, in a way, I feel like the narrative right now, the macro narrative is like unsettled. It's like who knows, open race, whatever. So it feels like there aren't enough narratives. Like we sort of need to get to know these people.
Well, ask us on November 15th how we feel about being settled, and then we'll see. We'll see where things land. Well, I guess the Governor's Awards, when all the contenders all come in one place, that's on the 17th. So that'll be a very interesting way to gauge how the election made everybody freak out or not, one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that you feel them hitting like real people, like real audiences, like Anora. I just feel like everyone who sees it loves it. I mean, I think my favorite thing I've seen has been The Brutalist. I just was so awed by it, and I'm very curious to see how it sort of what its road is like.
Yeah.
And there's some sticky politics about it. There's some Zionist stuff. I'm just so curious, but it's also just like, it's ravishing. And I'm just so curious to see how it sort of progresses through award season, and as we get to know it, like we have to get to know these people. It's kind of like, the voters who say they want to know more about Kamala Harris. Like I feel like we all need to know more about some of these people and like
Brady
get to know
Corbin,
them.
give us your stump speech. Show us what you can do. I mean, the politics of The Brutalist is funny because I feel like maybe you see a movie and you're like, all right, well, what are the worst people on Twitter going to say about it? And you kind of try to figure out like what the lines of attack might be. Like Emilia Perez is one I just have been wondering about ever since I saw it, of like what is going to happen when an attempt at backlash comes, because it comes for all of them eventually, right? And like whether or not it actually sticks is a question. But a lot of these movies are like wandering into, even A Real Pain, like Jesse Eisenberg, you've got a profile up recently, like that's dealing with like the legacy of the Holocaust and American Jews in a way that maybe less so than The Brutalist steps into sticky territory. So it's just interesting to see how those navigate it and how they tell their story, not like the bad faith reading somebody wants to give it on the internet.
Yeah, I'm also really stumped by Emilia Perez, to be honest.
Interesting.
Like, I saw it and I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know what to predict for its Oscar stickiness. It's such an unusual movie with so many elements like smashed together, and it's hard to figure out like even what country it's from, like what genre it is, who the main character is. It's like a fascinating movie, but it's just really hard to pin down. And I'm very, very curious to see just like as it gets sort of dissected in that pitiless way that Oscar season does, like, where are we all going to land on it? Like,
Yeah.
even just what it is, how is it going to be defined in sort of in a narrative sense? I don't know.
That TIFF Audience Award placed either second or third with Honora behind Life of Chuck. That win seemed to say to me, like, okay, it's got a power that is outside of this like chattering class thing. Like, it's resonating with people in some way. And that feels like kind of insurance against some of that stuff you're talking about. Like, if it hits a chord with people, it's going to do that kind of no matter what else is around it.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I feel like maybe at the end of the season, we need to catch up on what the war was. Like, this is gonna ask you in a lightning round question, like, what were the battle lines of this whole scene? People should read your book, obviously, for more Oscar Wars history. And yeah, please come back again soon.
Thank you for having me. I'd love to come back anytime. This has been a delight.
So we're going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back with my conversation with the star of Civil War, Kirsten Dunst. So my conversation with Kirsten Dunst, the star of Civil War, is really exactly the kind of thing that makes me glad that I do this podcast. The movie was a pretty solid hit when it opened in April, despite being this really grim story about photojournalists in a near-future version of America that has descended into a really scary civil war. And Dunst's performance is one of the things that really anchors the movie. She plays a veteran photojournalist named Lee who has been really forced to numb herself to the horrors that she's seeing, but finds herself changing a little bit when she teams up with a younger photographer played by Kaylee Spaney as they make their way to the White House as Washington, D.C. is kind of falling into mayhem. Dunst gives this fantastic performance, but it might be easy to overlook by this time of year. There's so many other movies coming out, so many new things vying for our attention. So I was really glad I got the chance to circle back with her and talk about the performance, talk about the way she prepares herself for something that's this intense, and why a director like Alex Garland can convince her to jump on board. This is the first movie she had made after The Power of the Dog, after she took some time to have her second child. And we also talked about being parents. Obviously, it's a hot topic for me. She has two sons, just as I do. And it was just fascinating to learn about how she turns it all off when she goes home from set at the end of the day to be a present parent for her kids. And also how she's working her family life into some cool upcoming projects that she's doing with Derek Cianfrance, as well as Ruben Ostlund. I really loved talking to her. I think you'll love hearing it. You can hear my conversation now with the star of Civil War, Kirsten Dunst. I was listening to some of the press you did for The Power of the Dog, and you were saying you were about to go back to work kind of at the end of that awards promo cycle. I guess that was on Civil War, right?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. So like you had said that you were so eager to work with Alex Garland, but I wonder if that was like a, after taking that time, after being so focused on having your kids, if like figuring out what you wanted to jump back in with was hard and maybe the script made it easy.
You know what? For me, I'm so director driven that I really care more about the experience than even sometimes the role I'm playing.
Sure.
For me, it's more about who the director is, because that's all you have is the experience. So I really love the way Derek Cianfrance works. It's really free and unconventional, and I'm excited to do that with him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for Alex Garland, I know you said you were a fan of his work for Civil War, but like, did you know people who had worked with him where you're like, okay, that's someone who I like want to take the time to, spend this time with?
I didn't. He's such a unique filmmaker. So that's why I wanted to work with him, because, when he does things, he takes big risks. So I like that about him.
Yeah. So when you say you're director driven, it's about, in some ways, what you see on the screen, not as much like, oh, he's a nice guy to work with on set, or I guess it's some combo of both.
Yeah. I've been pretty lucky with that because there are those, auteurs that can be difficult, but I'll put up with a lot.
Okay.
But not being nice to other people and things, like I haven't had that with a director, but that would make me very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, you had said something, I think it was in British GQ, about there was an AD on Civil War who you'd worked with like 20 years earlier, and like said something that like you kind of finally came around and were like, hey, don't just like, so is that something you've grown into some about the who you will put up with on a set?
Oh, well, it's just, I think when you're younger, I think it was just the time too. I was just a little more timid in saying things. But yeah, Not anymore. But I'm so much more impressed by people. Younger people these days are so much more on that,
Oh, that's interesting. In terms of like knowing how they should be treated.
Yeah, I feel like people are. I'm working with this young woman right now. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, you're so much cooler than me. She's 19, and I'm like, whoa, she seems so much more self-possessed and than I was.
Yeah.
I think the ultimate thing you want on set is to feel supported by your peers and honesty, and you're there for each other, because that's how you make something good. Like, no one wants to be fearful. No one wants to be intimidating by anybody. You just want to feel like you're in a safe zone as much as possible to be free, because that's the best kind of acting to me.
Yeah. Do you have like approach that you found over the years of, when you first meet your coworkers, your co-stars, like how to set up that level of comfort and trust, like something that you can do in the early days to get everybody, feeling good about each other?
I think bonding is really important. On Derek's movie, we made dinner together and went grocery shopping, the girls and I, and who play my daughters. And that stuff's invaluable, because immediately it sets up dynamics and a history, or like something you wouldn't expect just from rehearsing lines. We also spent so much time together in that car too.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like you really get to know each other really well.
Even like a real road trip.
With snacks all over this car, water. It's just like a mess in there. And so many cameras. I think we had like 10 cameras attached to that car, like little small digital cameras all around. So I think he took, depending on the shot, cameras out in VFX just so that it could feel like everyone was kind of on at the same time. So it felt more like real with everyone acting at once.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this made everything feel more like a play, doing it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me that there's an acting coach who you were talking about working with on this one, who you started working with around making All Good Things in 2010. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if kind of changing that way of working was like kind of getting away from like the methods you figured out when you were a kid of how to be on a set. If there was like a point where you had to consciously approach it more as an adult, did it feel that way to you, or was it more of a gradual process of like becoming the adult version of the acting you had been doing since you were a kid?
Yeah, I mean, even growing up, you find your taste in film, and you're growing up and figuring out what you like and what direction you want to take as an actor. And I think that there was a point where I was a little bit done, because a lot of it felt like a little bit for other people and not for myself. Mm-hmm. And I found this acting coach, Greta Seacat, who works with a lot of incredible actors, and her method, I started working with her on All Good Things, this movie I did with Ryan Gosling. He introduced me to her. And she changed what acting is for me and gave me like a whole new way of doing things that really reinforced my love for what I do. And she really changed it for me.
What is the feeling that makes it clear that you're doing something for you, that like you're approaching acting in a way that satisfies you and not somebody else? Is it always clear to you when it works that way?
Yeah, it is, because I've worked so deeply internally, like with her on the role and with my own self and my unconscious mind. And we do a lot of dream work, that it feels like it's solely coming from me. So I'm the most knowledgeable person about the role that I'm playing. And so I just feel like a freedom that I never felt. Not like, ooh, am I doing this right? Or I think fear is not a good thing to have when you're acting. You want to be fearless, Mm-hmm. So it kind of gave me a feeling that it's okay to mess up. It's, it's okay to go any place you want to go.
It just feels like it takes away the insecurity of like being, everyone's waiting on you to get your line right. And that pressure, it sounds like maybe that disappears a little bit when you can do that level of work.
Yeah, it does. All that's gone. Like, who cares if you mess up a line? It's like, there's more takes. I guess when you're working on film, that might feel a little differently. But digital, you can just mess up all you want. Not that I don't know my lines, but it. Yeah. There's room, and I think my favorite performances feel like you're watching real people.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really the Derek C. in France, like all that prep you're talking about, in his films, like that's so much of the magic of those. So it's cool that you get to go down that road.
And he does shoot on film though.
Okay. All right. A little bit more. A little bit more pressure this time around.
I don't know. It feels like you're wasting a lot of money.
But it looks so good. It's
going to look way better.
Off.
Yeah, it will look way better. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Civil War has so much going on. For being a pretty small movie, there's like effects and the spectacle to it. But a lot of the movie really rests on your face and like you reacting and not reacting to what you're seeing. And I don't know how to ask about like how you use your face without it just being asking like what is acting. But I feel like the power of the close-ups in this movie are really significant. And I wonder how much you thought about that, planned for that, if that was part of the prep you did of realizing that your face was telling so much of the story.
Well, I think if you're in the space that you've decided kind of on, and I don't think about, oh, it's my close-up, or, I don't think about it that way at all.
But you know it's there at some point, but it's just not part of the conscious brain.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, this close-up, I'm going to convey this. I have my notes of ideas of what I'm seeing or what I'm feeling in this moment. I have ideas, but they're not like so literal either. Like I remember when I was working with Kaylee, one of the first scenes we had, I had an idea that we were like a mother and daughter in a past life or something, so that our connection when we're talking feels deeper than what's on the page. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's like a connection there that makes the scene deeper than just saying that you need this, and this to be safe. You know what I mean? Anything that deepens what you're doing, I think is important, especially when there's a lot of action in this film. So
yeah,
you need it to be really rooted and get in all those really truthful relationships quickly, you know? So
yeah.
I think that helps a lot.
When you watch the film and the final product and you see like, oh yes, that I am getting across exactly what I wanted to. Like, do you like at this point now, do you know how to use your face in a way where it can take very little to get all of that through?
No, I don't think of how I'm going to use my face. Otherwise, I'd get in my head, you know?
Sure.
I've used things to inspire me, but not. When I watch the film, I'm just picking myself apart. Like I'm not.
Okay.
But also, it kind of feels like the first time you watch a movie, it kind of feels like a home video where you're like, oh, that day this happened, or oh God, we, ate this day, or this day was a lot of work. Like this was exhausting, or it just kind of like that's how I watch a film. It feels like you're watching a home video of sorts.
Yeah. Well, when you get more distance from it, like if you were to watch something from 20 years ago, would you be able to see it more as a movie and not a home video? Or does that always stay? I don't know if you rewatch older movies like that, but I wonder if that fades after a while and the movie itself kind of emerges.
I think when you've taken a long time and like something's on TV and you see something of yourself, you're not as critical and you're like, oh, you actually did a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're just so much less critical.
Yeah. Well, I think of that especially with someone who started acting when they're so young. Like, obviously, what you were able to do when you were 12 is not the same as what you can do now. But, like, if there's more affection than, like, oh, you didn't know what you were doing, you can be more generous with yourself after a while.
I just felt like, how cool is it that my kids and that I have my life documented in this way is kind of pretty incredible.
Yeah, that is cool.
Like with photos and film and in a beautiful way too. Like with Sophia, like we really have, like I have beautiful documentation of me growing up. So that's very special for my kids to have, I think. And yeah, it's unique to be able to have that, I think.
Do you have anything you've been able to show your kids yet?
Yes. On Civil War, Ennis liked to watch Jumanji.
Okay. That would be my first guess of what you could throw.
Jumanji. And then my little guy loves Spider-Man. He's seen some of my Spider-Man, but I don't even know if he really connects that it's me because I have red hair, but he's obsessed with Spider-Man. So it's funny if we're like, he's wearing his Spider-Man stuff and I'm like carrying him around. Other adults like look at us and laugh. Because here I am with like baby Spidey holding him in the grocery store, and there's Mary Jane like holding her child who loves Spider-Man.
And someday kids his age are going to be like, no, Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Your kid's going to be like, no, it's Tobey Maguire. And then he'll be, you get to have their Spider-Man battle there. So, you go back to work after this Power of the Dog experience. You and Jesse get nominated at the same time. You're kind of right up at the center of that. Like, now that you've had a couple years after that, obviously it probably felt like a whirlwind. It was still really COVID-y. You had a new baby at home.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you feel like anything shifted for you after that process of any kind of new perspective or new, like, access to things that weren't before? Has any of that emerged?
Yeah, I think having kids, after having my first kid, I felt a lot more freedom. It's just because you're dealing with, your level of being present rises to a whole new level, don't you think?
Yeah.
You're just so much more engaged. So, and also wiping, but like you're like the reality of just fluids and things in your face at all times. You just become like the biggest slob and you don't care. Too. You know what I mean? You're like,
yeah.
So I think that plus the beauty of it mixed all together just makes you not give as many fucks,
Yeah. Well, and like, it's not like you don't matter when you're parenting your kids, but like you as an individual are so subsumed into like your family. And like, when you have little babies, it's like they are like you're the same person in these weird ways. So like the idea of individuality, I feel like after you have kids just changes so much. Like what is important about you as an individual person.
Oh, I've like totally lost my. I'm like, who am I? I'm like, all I do is watch cartoons. I don't put the news on because I don't want to freak them out. So I don't watch the news. I listen to their songs. I don't know what's pop. I always am like catching up at the last minute of anything. So I feel like I really am excited to go back to work. I really need that.
Well, because I feel like, there could be like, oh, well, now I'm just a mom now. But like clearly you want to work. You have that like desire to get back out there. So like there's an artistic drive that maybe hasn't changed or has changed as having kids, but is still there. Like, have you put your finger on that?
It hasn't changed. It's just like I'm very picky in what I do because I think because I've worked for so long since I was 3, I can't just do things for money or I can't do things that my heart's not into because I think I've done this for so long that's the one thing I feel like I can give myself or that I deserve. But that also is funny because it's taken a while. Like I haven't worked in 3 years and now I'm working with Derek because I love his movies and his way of working. And then I'm working with Ruben Ostlund after that.
Yeah.
So it just happened. Like I haven't worked in 3 years and now I'm doing back to back.
Yeah. But so it's like you calibrate your radar of being like, and it's not just this is appealing for like 1 reason or 2 reasons. It's got to have 10 reasons. Like you just, when it's being picky, just like asking yourself over and over again, do I really want to do this until it finally clicks?
It's the director for me. Like, do I need to read Ruben Ostlund's script? No, he's brilliant. You know what I mean? Like, and I had to audition for that too, which I haven't done in a long time. So that felt extra great,
So yeah, what's it like going into an audition again after clearly you've done it many times in your career, but not in a while?
I think it's been like 7. I hadn't auditioned since Jeff Nichols for Midnight Special. So it was a long time, and I did an improv for Ruben, and I put myself on tape on my iPhone.
Are you familiar? Like, is doing improvs for auditions something that like feels comfortable, or you've done before?
It's nice to do it yourself, and it was an improv without like dialogue, really. So it's funny. I put a camera that Jesse uses a lot next to me because I'm supposed to be next to my husband who's sleeping with our child. And I had no one next to me. So I just put a camera up that Jesse uses a lot just to have like a symbol.
That's really cute.
And then I'm supposed to be on a plane. And what I didn't realize is during my audition improv that I did, there was like a low hum on the stove that kind of made it sound like I was in an airplane.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize after. I was like, wow, I even did a good...
Yeah, it made you seem very, very method. Yeah, like a sound designer.
Yeah, sound designer. Thank you. Yeah, I did. Yeah. And I didn't even realize that I did that. But after I watched my tape, I did 1 take. Halfway through, I was like, I'm not feeling this. So I stopped. And the second take, I did it. And I didn't even watch it. I was like, okay, I'm sending this. That felt real.
Yeah. Is it like, it sounds like kind of a fun acting exercise the way you're talking about it. Like obviously auditioning is pressure, but it like gives you a chance to do something different that you don't otherwise get to do.
Well, also you could do as many takes as you want. You're by yourself. You know what I mean? I just have my iPhone and I set it up. It was I showed it to my girlfriends after I sent it, and they were like, okay, good. My friend, who's a young filmmaker, Hannah Mark, she was like, I feel like I'm watching a Ruben Östlund movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's pretty high praise.
It's like, I think you're going to get this.
So it sounds like retirement is never really an option for you. Like, you're going to keep coming back to do, because like the art is still going to be there waiting for you no matter what.
I mean, I hope so. I never want to not do what I do.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would do.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I get, when you're a stay-at-home mom for a period, I feel like there's always that point where you're like, okay, well, like this could be it. And there are people for whom that totally works. But I feel like you're not the only person who you get a ways into it. You're like, nah, I gotta like step out. I gotta like reach outside of this world and find something different.
I have to fuel that part of myself. I love what I do. And it's important for them to see that I love what I do and that I do do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say, like, obviously people talking about their children publicly is like a really personal decision. But like the way that you talk about how kids changes just so many practicalities of your life, not about who they are, but like who you are, and not in this kind of platitude way. I just feel really grateful for it. Like, I don't know if that was a hard thing to decide to do, to talk publicly about, but it's very gratifying for other moms in similar situations.
Oh, good. Because we can use all the support we can get. I mean, the guilt thing and all that. It's like, you got to really remind yourself, we're such good parents compared to, I think, our parents probably. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know about you, but I just feel like I really like listen to them and talk to them. And I'm thoughtful about how I communicate with them and what they're dealing with. And
yeah. You recognize their feelings and you like acknowledge them and then try to figure out a way to move on from there. And that's it took me a while to like learn that, it's not an automatic thing from how we were raised, but then you kind of learn how well it works.
It does. I mean, distraction's always great for me. Like, if someone's crying, I'm like, oh my God, what color is that? Whatever. Like, I'm like, distract.
Yeah. That does it for this week. This show is edited by Brett Fuchs and co-produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Michael Schulman. Get the Prestige Junkie newsletter by going to theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, where you can see video of parts of this episode as well as answer this week's poll. You can subscribe also on Apple or anywhere else you get your podcasts. We will see you next week.